Hello and welcome to a very special Diminishing Returns this week, as we are, among many other things, we are going to pass the Bechdel test for the first time ever.
That is true. It's the first time we've had more than one woman on the show at once.
Yes. But, you know...
Episode 238, or whatever it is we're on.
Yes, so I'm Sol, that's Alan. We're going to talk about a film, and we are joined by two very exciting new guests. We have got Lianna Holston and Siena Jeakle. I don't know if I pronounced those names correctly or not. Was that right?
So close. Jeakle, but there's no way to possibly predict that. Yeah.
You nailed mine. No notes. Thank you.
Excellent.
So yeah, thanks for joining us, guys. So yeah, if you just want to talk about anything apart from another man for like 10 seconds now.
Oh my gosh. Happily. So excited to be here breaking ground on the pod. What an honor. Sienna, what do you have for breakfast today?
I had scrambled eggs that I made by myself.
Oh my God. Feminism is alive. It's happening. It's real. I love it.
Amazing. I think we've done it there. Does that count?
That's it.
I did just cut you off and talk over you, but it still counts.
I think we're all going to learn a lot of lessons.
So, I reached out to you two because you did a podcast pilot and possibly will be taking it to series in some capacity in the future for a show called Frankly, My Dear, where the two of you discuss each of the films on the AFI 100 Greatest American Films list. And I think the idea is that neither of you really know much about films and...
You don't like films.
Yeah.
Correct.
So a perfect fit for a film podcast. Excellent work.
Who better to give expert advice on them?
Yeah. So listeners, if you remember me going on and on about that Development Hell pilot thing recently, that's how I came across these two. They did another pilot for that same thing. So at the time of this going out, you can at very least go and check out their pilot, Frankly, My Dear, at whatever website it's at. If it's still going to be nextgreatpodcast.com or somewhere else, I'm sure it'll come up if you search for it. But no, it's very good, well worth checking out. You both talked about Citizen Kane, which we covered on this podcast quite recently. And I actually invited you on that episode, but then you said, we're doing it for our thing. And yeah, fair enough. It's probably not worth talking about too much. Plus, you know, Alan, myself, and Calvin, who did our Citizen Kane episode, all really liked Citizen Kane.
Oh, no!
So it might
Very
have
brave
been...
to admit that.
Yeah, it might have been a bit... I don't know, sparks might have flown.
So, guys, what you do on your podcast is you've been going through the AFI films, so they're the best American films that people love, and then you basically talk about how you don't like them. So, as you are coming to be our guest today on this very British podcast, even though we don't particularly focus on British films, we thought let's pick the most British film we could think of, and set you the challenge of watching that.
Y'all, what the hell?
So yeah, just to clarify, we sent you the film Kes, which is not just a British film, but a Yorkshire film, a Barnsley film, which is, even for British audiences, is quite impenetrable for the accents.
It's not just, that's it. It's not just like difficult for. But when I rewatched this film the other day, I dug up a dodgy copy online because I have seen it before and I didn't feel like paying for it. Because I'm getting made redundant, you know. And I genuinely, for the first few minutes, thought, I've dug up a foreign copy. It's in French or something.
Jude? What? You believe?
Shut it.
Clock's not fascinant.
I said shut it.
Give up that.
I'll shut it then.
I'll tell my mum on you.
And I'm not joking, I genuinely thought that. And then they got to the shop and started talking to someone who didn't have quite as broad an accent. And I was like, oh no, it's just the accent.
Yeah, seconds in, I turned on subtitles and it tried to auto guess what language it was in, and I think it put them in Czech. I was like,
Can
that
I-
helped?
Can I amaze you two? So the film is set in Barnsley, which is part of Yorkshire. Alan is from Barnsley.
Whoa.
I am indeed, yes.
Oh my god, are you okay? According to this film, you should not be.
Well, that's it. I'm from the same town where this was filmed, and basically I was struggling to understand some of what they were saying, and I was brought up in this language. Although I am frightfully middle class, obviously, so I'm not quite as connected to the mining communities of the 60s. But having said that, my parents were basically, I'm going to get into this later because it's going to come into the social stream, but my parents were from that area and they were very working class. My grandfathers were miners. They worked in the mines.
Wow.
So they very much lived this life. Yeah. So I do have kind of not exactly a nostalgia for this film because obviously I didn't live in this era, but there's definitely familiarity there for me. Like I recognize things, not places like that specifically, but the people. Like the old people in the working man's club and stuff. It's like that's my granny, like that's how she spoke and everything. So we'll get into that a bit later.
One thing I was wondering was what this film means for British people. Like, what number is it on the list? Like, is it like a Citizen
Number 7.
Like,
So
everyone's seen it?
Yeah,
You watch it in school?
yeah.
Like, what is it?
The reason I picked out for us to do here was I thought, let's do the BFI top 100 instead of the AFI top 100. But then when I went to the BFI top 100 British films ever made, they're not very British. The number one film on there is The Third Man, which is basically
Set in Vienna.
Well, that's it. It stars Orson Welles, who you're now a big fan of, and it's set in Vienna. So it's an American running around in Vienna, and I think it had a British, director and writer behind the camera, but it's not very inherently British, and that's true of most big British films. To be honest, aren't that inherently British. It's stuff like Alien and films where some British companies put the money in and it's a British person directing it, but it's full of American actors and designed to play internationally. And another film on the BFI top 10 is Don't Look Now, which is it stars Canadian Donald Sutherland running around Venice.
That really surprises me. You guys have the good actors over there. That's what you're
but they
known
all go
for.
off to Hollywood as soon as they're able to.
That's funny because all the American Film Institute list films are so like the epitome of manifest destiny and like deeply problematic.
Yeah.
Oh god, yeah. So yeah, I basically just worked down the list until I got to number 7 when I was like, oh, that one's actually quite British. I mean, more than anything, British talent. It's a whole thing over here. Anyone who does well in the British film industry goes to Hollywood as soon as they can and makes big budget Hollywood movies. And maybe they come back here and make a little film once in a blue moon, but they kind of go Hollywood. Ken Loach, who directed Kes, is one of the only real powerhouse names in the world of British film who I don't think ever really went off to America or betrayed his roots. He's still making films like this today.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. Ken Loach is, he's been making the same kind of films for his entire career, in that they're kind of championing the underdog and going, oh, look at these downtrodden people. We should look at them a bit more. Mostly based on a class system which doesn't quite exist in the same way anymore as it did back in the 60s. Ken Loach has won the Palme d'Or twice, which, is, in terms of artistic credibility, is
fancy.
Excellent. One for The Wind That Shakes the Barley, which was about basically Ireland struggling to not to be part of Britain, and so is about the Irish Revolution and things in the 1918, something like that. But yeah, so Ken Loach basically makes slightly authoritarian films. Like he tackles the status quo, and that is something he's done throughout his career. Did a lot of documentary things in the 80s and that sort of thing. So he really is someone who's stuck to his principles, and he's making films that have a message. And whether they he's not interested in being entertaining, I guess.
That was clear.
Well, Ken Loach, is, a dyed-in-the-wool socialist. Now, I know in America that's a dirty word. Over here, it's kind of being nice to people who need help.
Isn't that a crazy concept? To have rights.
Yeah.
But in America, that's like basically communism, and communism is killing everyone.
Yeah, people get
that's the straight line there, isn't it? But yeah, even over here, he's very, very left wing, really.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I mean, I first saw Kes probably 15 years ago or something, and I came to it because a friend of mine who I worked with at the time, it was his favourite film ever, and he went on and on about how amazing it was and lent me the DVD, and I went and watched it, and I was sort of just getting into film at the time, so I was in...
what would you have been, like 15, 16?
Yeah, probably about 15. And so when I was about 14, 15, 16, I watched a lot of classic films and didn't really dare say that they weren't good ever.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were a lot of films like Scarface is one I remember just going, well, people say it's good, it must be great. And then I revisited it far more recently and I was like, no, that's a really badly written, badly made film. And Kes was one of those where I kind of didn't really click with it, but I didn't dare say anything bad about it. And I rewatched it yesterday, and I think if anything, I'd almost convinced myself it was better than it was. Bizarrely, I remember a completely different ending to the film than what it is. I was trying to hold back tears halfway through the film because I started remembering the ending. And my memory of the ending is this heartbreaking sequence of events where you like see the kid going down into the mines and like sort of giving a sad look to the teacher who tried to stop him from going down the mines. And I watched the film and there's nothing like that in there. I don't know what.
That's interesting that you take that out, because I think that is kind of what it implies, or certainly that's one potential future for this kid. And
yeah, it's implicitly there, but I remember very clearly the shot, and so I just imagined part of the film, and basically I just didn't really connect with it on this rewatch. I kind of get what it's doing and can respect what it was doing, but it just didn't work for me on a entertainment level, which is weird. Because, like I say, I watched Ken Loach's most recent film quite recently, and that was the complete opposite. It was the same bleak, just a load of mundane, depressing stuff happening, but I found it utterly captivating. So I don't know if that speaks to just a change in film language and the fact that it's more modern, and the fact that this is still quite 1960s in its approach to filmmaking, and it's a bit slower as a result of it, or what, really? I don't know. Alan?
I don't know. Maybe it's just something you relate to more.
Yeah,
maybe.
Those characters.
I will say the most recent one, the main actor is a sort of Mancunian guy, a guy from Manchester. If that makes no sense to you.
Oh, it did not.
and I am I sort of consider myself vaguely Mancunian. I'm from all over the UK. I've lived all over, so I guess I maybe connected with that a bit more, hearing that kind of fucking Manchester accent.
Oh yeah.
Instead of that kind of.
No, I've seen Love Island. I know.
Whatever Yorkshire.
I'm familiar with the builders from Manchester.
Yeah.
I have a question, and that is,
yes.
When you received this DVD from your friend back in the day, was this cover of Billy projected onto a trash can?
A bin. That's literally what it is on iTunes. Billy on trash.
No.
I don't think it was. No, I'm going to have to look up the poster now.
Well, like I say, the famous poster here is like him sticking twos up, basically, which is quite a British thing, I suppose. It might not play if it's an American poster thing.
Oh, what is it?
It's like a milder form of flipping the bird.
Well,
yeah.
Isn't it based off of archers who would get their fingers cut off?
So they say. I don't know how true that is, but that's the story. Yeah.
I think I've seen that disputed in places, but that's what most people attribute it to.
Okay, so we generally kind of attack the film chronologically, sort of scene by scene.
Yeah.
Don't have to be too strict with that, but what I guess you're 30 seconds into the film. You've had to stop to turn the subtitles on.
Not even 30
what,
seconds.
what were your first thoughts, I guess? What was your initial impression? Oh, no, let me ask this question. I'm assuming you didn't know anything about the film before. So what were you expecting based on the picture of a boy on a bin?
I had read the iTunes description that was like, Billy the boy is sad and has a bad time for 2 hours, pretty much. And there's a bird. And I was like, yeah, that sounds right. So I was anticipating a boy just getting bullied for a while, and then also I was like, "There's no way this bird does not get snapped in half." And that has to be what happens.
That's interesting that you foresaw that, the desolate ending.
I did not read the description before, and I'm really glad I did not, because when I read it afterward, I felt that it was very misleading. It seems like so much more of the movie did follow because it said, this boy gets a bird and whatever, but the movie didn't feel like that to me. It was, we'll get into it was so much more sitting with people yelling at each other that was not in the description. But anyway,
yeah,
I did not look at any pictures or anything, but from the name Kess, I was positive it was going to be about soccer, and the entire time
football, if you will.
Yeah, football. Sorry. I just because it sounded, but I can't explain to you. I was just sure of it, and so the entire time I was waiting, and I in fact did get. I think it was soccer, maybe rugby. What was it?
That's football.
Okay, so when I got to that scene, I was like, I knew it the whole time.
She was so excited. I have to say, very beginning, first scene, the guys in the bed. One of the worst lines in cinema was uttered, which was the older brother says to the younger brother, I wrote this down, hands off cocks on socks. That sort of sealed the deal for the rest of the film for me.
Is that a British thing? Because I that's like an army thing, but it might be like a British army thing specifically.
I have gone my whole life not hearing it, blessedly, until yesterday.
Yeah, it's probably a British army thing. Thinking about
God.
it,
Yeah.
But they like it's one of those things the drill sergeant shouts when he comes into the room, isn't it?
Yeah, get everyone moving.
Get
but yeah, that opening scene, yeah, we see them. I mean, it sets the scene immediately. You got two kids sharing a bed. I mean, they're not sharing a room; they're sharing a bed. It's just like immediately says like these guys have not got a lot of privacy. They've not got money, money. So it sets your scene pretty good. I noticed they did have sheets and like a blanket as well. Bloody luxury, I tell you. Yeah, having proper sheets. No, they don't know they're born, these kids, honestly. My dad tells a story of how he and his brother, who shared a bed, would sleep under their dad's greatcoat. So just like a big winter coat. That was like that was what they slept under. I don't know if that was like, I think that was just like when it was particularly cold and they needed an extra layer rather than just a standard, I think.
My first 30 seconds watching this film, I felt truly awful because I just started thinking like, oh God, I've made these two people watch this film. And I felt really bad.
You should. Yeah, it was bad. It was a bad time.
I don't know, I kind of thought it would be a bit more... We covered a film called This Is England quite recently on this podcast, and it's almost like a modern evolution of what Ken Loach
it definitely is. And I imagine if you talk to Shane Meadows, who directed This Is England, he would cite this as a direct influence. There's no way. It's a straight line between the two. It's not.
Yeah. But we both love that film, and beyond that, it's over in the UK. I'm sure no one in America has ever heard of it at all, because it is very, very British. But it's quite a mainstream thing here. They made a TV show follow up to it, and that got huge, by British standards, viewing figures, and it was a really well-regarded bit of work. And that's this same kind of bleak drama, but I suppose it's very accessible as a mainstream bit of entertainment in a way that perhaps this isn't. And I suppose in my memory, I think I had chosen something that you might be able to enjoy, but 30 seconds in, I was like, oh no, this is going to be 2 hours of just...
It's like the color grade that gets worse over the course of 120 minutes is how I would describe this film.
It was certainly upsetting. I will say, one thing that I was enjoying throughout the film, I guess enjoy is a word I could use for it, I was very fascinated by, was culturally, I was very curious and fascinated the whole time to be kind of taking in this, because I've seen movies about, the American working class and how America would pose our struggles and everything, but it was interesting to see, I don't know, a movie about the British working class, and I don't know, I definitely have a lot of questions that will come up.
I was probably not fair on this film because as soon as they introduced like minors and a kid named Billy, I was like, I just wish this was Billy Elliot.
Start dancing.
I was like, please,
Well,
I want the musical. I want it now.
I remembered him being a Geordie in this film, which I think was Billy Elliot, confusing me. Yeah, because I was expecting Geordie accents, and then I was like, well, that's a really strong, weird accent, but it's not Geordie. What is it? Oh, it's Barnsley. Yeah.
The fact that they do that in the accents and they stuck with that obviously affected the success of the film and its distribution, even in Britain and certainly in America. But it's important. It's because when you hear that kid talk, you don't think, oh, he might grow up to be a doctor one day. You think he's just a common as muck working class scruff. Like that might not come across to you so much, but like that is a working class accent. And that sets you up. So when you hear the teachers talking, they're a bit more well spoken.
And I think that's it really. In the UK, it kind of is how much you, not necessarily consciously, but I think just a lot of people will develop much more of an RP accent for professional reasons and being able to or just travelling, like you say, going off to uni in another part of the country.
But that's it. You're not going to go up in as a solicitor and go up in front of a judge and go, right then, lad, I've got some evidence for the year.
Right.
Shut up, exhibit A for us. It's just not professional.
All the accents carry baggage as well, like I'd say the proper Mancunian and Liverpudlian accents are both quite aggressive, I think, to most
or Glaswegian.
Northwestern types.
Scottish accent is So the film is based on a book by Barry Hines called Kestrel for a Knave. And it was written a year before, although they got the rights to it before it was even published, because they were working with this guy as a writer for other things anyway. So they really liked it, they wanted to make it. And I thought, and I don't know how you feel about this, Saul, but like when we watched This Is England, which we've already mentioned, there's a certain improvisational nature to it. Like they set them up because they're using mostly kind of non-actors or inexperienced actors. So they kind of say, look, this is your character, this is the scene, do a lot of kind of rehearsal-y stuff with them. But then they kind of let it flow where it might go. And I kind of thought that Kes had that same feel because it feels quite improvised.
Yeah, there's a credit right at the start that says something like thanks to the Barnsley local primary school or something. So
so all the extras, all the school kids, and they're all local extras. But having said that, it's really close to the novel. It is extremely faithful to it in terms of the story beats and things. So how specifically they play out in terms of dialogue and stuff, maybe not.
But there's not a huge deal of plot, is there? So maybe that's why. Like I was.
But it's like right down to things like, oh, he goes to class and they ask him to tell a story, so he tells a story about his kestrel. Like really specific things like that, which is obviously you can set that up and then just get him to do it. But it was much more closely aligned. Like I just thought this is like, let's film this kid and say, oh, look how shit his life is. Oh, look, his brother's a bastard. That's about it. But it's all there, which is interesting because none of these guys were really actors, certainly not well established. The kid obviously wasn't an actor. So, for example, when he goes to the library, the librarian talks to him. Like that's not an actor. I think it's a librarian. I'm not sure, but I think they just sort of went into the library.
Interesting way to make a film. Just get people from the actual profession to play the role.
That's what Ken Loach does now. Still, I think as I keep going back to this film he made last year. Sorry, We Missed You. My understanding is certainly the two main actors, the guy who's like a delivery driver and his wife who's a carer who goes around to old people's homes and so on. They were both complete non-actors that he discovered, and I think they were people doing those jobs who, it shows at times the woman in that film particularly is clearly not an actor professionally, but then I think that brings a real raw kind of what's the word? Like a vulnerability to the characters sometimes. Like you definitely get something by doing that, I think, sometimes. And I think you get a lot of that same energy in Kez, but maybe not
Yeah, I mean, I think
consistently all the way through.
I think whatever our boy Ken was going for, he certainly achieved. Like, I think he did a really good job of what he set out to do. But as you said, not necessarily meant to be enjoyed. I think also, as an American, we are so set up to expect a happy ending, or at least some moment of redemption or uplift or something like hope in some way. And this film never delivered. I remember Siena, you said a very funny thing about what you thought would happen to Billy by the end of it.
Yeah, at one point I realized the only way that this story could have been redeemed for me, after just people were yelling and yelling at this poor boy, I realized only if he turned into a kestrel at the very end and flew away would I be like,
into the sun.
That would be great. That would be a great ending. Apparently, Disney did want to buy the rights to this to remake it, but they said we want to give it a happy ending, and the author said no.
Could you imagine if
Disney
released this film?
Well, he would turn it if he turned into a kestrel at the end. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Not even. Because it's not that this film just ends on a bleak note, but it also ends incredibly abruptly.
Yeah.
There's no real satisfying conclusion. It just kind of cuts and you think, oh, is that it?
Well, it's interesting you said something there, Lianna, when you were talking about it, that there's no hope, basically. My last note, the last thing I wrote was the death of hope.
Oh.
That's the message of the film.
Yeah.
Like the whole point of this film is to go, look at these kids that we are not helping, and we're not even giving them hope. We're not giving them a chance. That's the message of it. Like that's the whole point. But it's not a nice one. It's not an easy one to take, because that's the whole point. That's the whole point, is like this lifestyle that they live. That this is it. There isn't a happy ending. He's gonna grow up a few years, get married, have his own kid, work a dead-end job, and then die of a heart attack when he's 58 because he lives in an area where they're pumping out coal dust into the air.
Yorkshire diet's not great as well. There's a lot of greasy food in the diet over there, isn't there, Alan? In Yorkshire, they do a thing where if you go and get fish and chips, which, most of the UK like their fish and chips, but in Yorkshire, when you get fish and chips, you ask for something called scraps. He does
this in the film. He goes and, have I got any scraps, missus? Does it, scraps means nothing to you, does it? It's just, okay.
Basically, yeah, scraps is all the little bits of batter that have fallen off in the deep fat fryer that are knocking around at the bottom, and they just sort of get all the bits of just fat, basically.
It's just deep fried batter.
Sure.
Yeah.
You need that.
Yeah, deep fried batter.
Boy.
He's a growing boy. Yeah, he's 15. Like the character's 15, but the actor is 15 as well.
Wow.
he looks 11 or 12. Like he doesn't look like he's gone through puberty even.
We were talking about that.
But he looks skinny and malnourished, and that's because he is. And the actor is as well, because that's where he lived. That's where he was from. That was his life.
Jesus Christ.
I was definitely very struck by all the adults in the film and how they were. The hopelessness definitely came across, because the way that people were speaking to each other, I just couldn't get over. By the time that the teacher was nice to him, it had been so much of the film. I think I wrote down at one point what minute of the film was the first time somebody asked him.
I had a very similar thought, to be honest, because for me that was when the plot really started, and it was the last half hour of the film, and it was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I suppose if it was an American remake, Matthew Perry would play that teacher. And he'd take a special interest and come home, and he'd end up dating Kez's mum. He'd do a rap to teach him history. Yeah.
Like, talk to me. What's going on? Oh my god.
Oh, I thought that was so sweet though. When the teacher, because the teacher's the first person, like you say, who's actually nice to him and shows the interest.
Yeah.
And then he drives down to see him with his kestrel, like even outside of school hours. Oh, that's so sweet. Actually, someone cares.
I know. Well, this is it. Like for me, the film really kicked up a gear around there. I was like, okay, I like this now, and I'm invested in these characters finally.
Yeah.
And I find the scenes with this guy really interesting and entertaining finally. but then it just doesn't go anywhere. And I know that's the point, but it's not I don't agree that it's necessarily the best way to make the point the film wants to make. Like I can't tell if it's either just not that incredibly well made or if it's just dated very badly. Because like I say, I watch very similar newer versions of the same sort of thing and really get into them. But I just found Kes dull.
Yeah, I think, because I agree. I think when a modern film or TV show or anything reveals something about like a culture that's not being paid enough attention or given enough like resources, something like that, I'm like, yeah, this is great. This is so powerful. This message needs to be conveyed. I'm so glad somebody's talking about this. So it is possible that Kes just sort of gets lost in the annals of time because it was like 50 years ago now. And so the relevancy.
Okay, one scene that I couldn't understand at all why it was included, even though I was rooting for it, was the soccer scene.
Yeah. It's totally
What
the beautiful thing. Okay, so yeah, the football scene, it is totally irrelevant. You're right.
I'd love a film analysis of it if you guys can shed any light at all.
Well, I mean, it feels like it's your comic relief. It's like, look, this is a bleak film, so enjoy this bit.
Well, remember the guy comes in with the music, with the marching? Yeah, it came in abruptly, a different style all of a sudden.
This is the funny bit. If you didn't find it funny, then you're really going to struggle with the rest of it.
I think the purpose of the first hour or so of this film, mostly, is just character development. It like the soccer scene, the football scene.
You're building the whole
just,
world, yeah.
Oh, God.
It's just, this is this kid's bleak life. He's getting bullied even here, but this is kind of the nice bit of his life.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think there's much to it beyond that. And then, like I say, about an hour in, the plot kicks into gear. He goes and catches a bird and develops a hobby, and then the film ends. And
well, that whole football playing scene, the PE thing, like the actor, the guy who's playing the teacher there, he is one of Britain's like primo actors. He is really one of the best.
Is
actors.
he? Who was it?
No, it's Brian Glover, who you of course will know from Alien 3. He's not really one of Britain's best actors, but he did go on to have a very successful career, mostly playing like hard-headed Yorkshiremen.
Sure.
But he was a professional wrestler before that, like is in the kind of entertainment wrestling sense. Yeah. So they brought him in for that. It's a sort of comedy thing, but that's his accent. You know, he's from Barnsley as well.
The number of times that there was a grown man alone in a room with children also didn't translate in America. Like,
we were stressed.
I think that would not be. I didn't actually feel
as uncomfortable thing,
because they were British. For some reason, it felt, and it was the 60s, right? But like, because they're British and it was the 60s, I felt like, okay, I know this is gonna be fine. But I was thinking, if this was American, I would not feel comfortable whatsoever. Like, they would not put that in. I think even in the 60s.
I did have a similar thought once or twice, and I think it's a sad reflection of our times compared to the 60s, which I suppose were far more innocent, perhaps naive. They just didn't really think about things like that.
Yeah. Also, the time thing, so many adolescent butts in the film. I was like, we're going to be arrested. What? You can watch this? Yeah, I think there's more like comfort in British media with nudity than in America. Yeah. We get stressed.
I have never seen a piece of British content, I don't think, that didn't at some point include a bum.
That's very possible. Yeah, the bums are funny.
That's the classic British sense of humour, which actually leads me on to something I did want to touch on related to Kes, and I suppose more specifically related to an American view of what the hell we're doing in this country. Certainly for people my age, I think Kes is probably now best remembered by a lot of people because there was a sketch show in the early 2000s. You guys won't know who Craig David is, will you?
No.
He never broke America. He tried desperately.
We're also the worst ones. Yeah, we don't know.
He was a singer, like a
Craig
kind
David
of
is an R&B musician.
Oh, certainly not. I don't
and
know.
he was incredibly successful in the UK
for about 18 months.
Yeah, for a few years, but incredibly successful
because he was young and sexy. He was really
Yeah.
And he did put out a lot of. He had I wrote it down, 20 UK top 40 singles in his career, which is quite a lot. Basically, there was a sketch show that started at the same time, which was I don't even know how to begin explaining this.
You can't explain.
This guy put on these awful rubber masks that were like caricatures of celebrities, and then would do impressions of the celebrities, but they didn't sound anything like them. It was really weird, and I mean, it wasn't particularly good, but it was incredibly successful for some reason.
Wow.
So it's basically like coming up with really weird and bizarre, grotesque kind of comedy characters, but then claiming that it's Craig David or Mel B out of the Spice Girls.
Well, one of the big ones he did was Michael Jackson, and I know that influenced Trey Parker of South Park's apparently a big fan, and that was how they based their Michael Jackson on South Park. It was based on Bo Selector, the name of the show. And he did this guy called Craig David, but for whatever reason, he decided to walk around with a fake kestrel taped to his arm, and instead of doing anything to do with Craig David, he just went round going, "Come on, our kids, it's me, Craig David."
And Craig David's not from Yorkshire, so there was no connection at all. It was just a completely random thing.
Yeah.
And I just think it's real. Like, the show was never funny, but what was funny is that Craig David hated it, and it pretty much killed his career, and he still blames it for ending his career now.
Oh my God.
He did an interview a few years back where he said that basically killed my career because I couldn't walk down the street without people coming up to me going, "Craig David," and like doing the voice at him. He's more recently tried to walk that back and say, "Oh, I don't really think that," but it's obviously a PR thing. He's obviously a friend of mine interviewed him for a piece she was writing, and apparently he had a watch on, and the watch had no numbers on it or hands. It was just a blank. So it wasn't a watch.
That's
it was just a blank disc on. Yeah.
Yeah, he wore a bracelet.
And she said, "Oh, that's an interesting watch. How come there's nothing on it?" And he said, "Because I don't need to know the time, because I live in the here and now." And I think that sums up Craig David as a person. But I just...
Never heard of tattoos, huh?
Are you guys in a position to watch a YouTube video if I send it over to you really quick?
Yeah,
Sure.
days.
This is what the lasting legacy of Kez is in the UK, or at least was about 10 years ago.
This is helpful because we were curious.
Righto, Craig David here, and welcome to Behind the Scenes of my UK tour.
British culture.
This is so... What? His face is... You...
That's what you get on British TV.
You what, Kez? Aye, I'm sure they've got a porn channel.
I love that I came into this with so much confidence about knowing about British culture, because I was like, I watch Taskmaster, I know British panel shows, let's go. And everything you've said has baffled me.
I mean, I'll be honest, I still don't really understand what Bo Selector was or how it became popular. It was one of those things that was inexplicably really successful for about 2 years.
Yeah.
And then most people probably don't even remember it now.
Mm.
Although that guy who did it's still really successful on ITV, which is kind of the... How would you describe ITV to an American, Alan? It's sort of the...
It's not the BBC.
Yeah.
I don't think he's even on ITV, Sol. He's on ITV2 now. I think that's...
He is, yeah.
I will say, I do think there was a true moment of actual comedy in the film, which was when Billy has just spent the night in the school. That was not funny. But then the next morning he's going for his interview for his job, and the mother and the son are sitting next to him in the waiting room, and the mother's like, "Shouldn't you go to the interview room? Like, go up there." And he walks up to the interview room, and as soon as he gets there, a man from inside the room yells at him, "Get out." I was like, that is comedy. This was the 5 seconds of the film that made it work.
Well, speaking of British comedy, what about the scene where we see in the Working Man's Club the performer doing a comedy song?
Could you?
Oh my God!
The Working Man's Club.
Yes.
What?
Okay, so a working man's club it's basically a pub. It's where you go to buy booze, but it's more specifically for the working men in the town. But anyone can go there. But it's like the community centre.
Okay.
But they will have they'll have a turn on. So they have a band.
I remember that scene. I remember acknowledging that I suppose humor was happening because people were laughing.
It's a song about a huge marrow. What more do you want?
Yeah, and what is a huge...
What? Yeah, I didn't know what that song was about.
I think language barrier.
Oh yeah, because marrow, Yeah, when Wallace and Gromit's movie went to America, they dubbed the line about a marrow and changed it to melon because they were worried Americans wouldn't understand.
And they were
I suppose
right.
they were right.
What is it? What is that?
A marrow.
A marrow,
It's a big
like a
green
vegetable.
thing. It's like a massive courgette.
It's similar to...
Like a zucchini?
Yeah.
Courgette.
But it's like a huge zucchini. Yeah.
So is it a dick joke? Is that why they're laughing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not a good joke.
But didn't you see the guy did a silly face when he made the noise? What more do you need for comedy?
I needed a lot more.
But like little details, like all the adults have like dirty yellow fingers because they smoke and it just stains your fingers because it was all just these horrible little rollies, like not nice filtered cigarettes that you get today that are really healthy. Like little details like that, which is obviously not makeup. It's just that's what they have. And when the mother, she's talking about how she married a wrong and stuff like that, little things like that in the language that just jumps out at me as being very familiar, very recognizable. So I get that perhaps doesn't play for everyone. So Barry Hines, who wrote the novel, he was a teacher, basically in that area. He was from that area. And he was a PE teacher, in fact. And he wrote the book. The idea of the book was to critique the education system. So that's really what this is about. That's why we see so many different teachers. That's why we see so many different types. That's kind of why we have that PE teacher there. He's saying, look at all these teachers and aren't they all arseholes? Apart from, this one's good, which is probably the one who's based on him.
He's not got enough support to do the job as well as he would perhaps like to. And,
But more specifically, he was critiquing, and really what Ken Loach wanted to critique was what we call the 11 plus system. I don't know if that's going to mean anything to you. So basically in the old days...
That doesn't even mean anything to me.
So in the 60s, we had these, you would go to school and then when you were 11, you took an exam, and if you were good, if you passed or were in the top whatever percentage, you got to go to a grammar school. And if you didn't, you just got sent to whatever the local crappy school was. And the grammar schools were better funded, they had better processes, and you could get in. And there was a lot of people, like you could get in and it was free if you passed the exam. So it was a great way for working class people to get a better education and sort of get out of their position. But a lot of people would pass, get a place, but they couldn't afford to go, not because there were any fees, but because they couldn't afford to buy a uniform and like books and things like that. Like that's the level of sort of poverty we're talking about. So, for example, I'm talking about my family. My grandparents were miners, proper, like basically this is their life. Both my parents passed and went to a grammar schools, and then they ended up working in a bank, which is like a much more nice middle class job. And so hence my parents are really middle class, although they've got this real working class ethic. And I've been brought up really middle class because of that. And so that was a big thing back then. And they're critiquing that because basically, rather than saying, look, let's pick the bright and the best and give them a good education, everyone else can fuck off, go and work in the mines, whatever. Yeah. Why don't we educate everyone? Like that's the basic thesis of the film, which makes a lot of sense. And indeed, that system doesn't exist anymore in the same way. Although you can still go to grammar schools, but it's all like private and fee paying and stuff like that now.
I do think in terms of critiquing the education system, it also commented very well on the cycle of abuse too. Just seeing it go down from, the older brother to the younger brother, or the teachers to the students, or the older students to the younger students. You just keep seeing it perpetuate. A
note I made, which is basically that impotent rage. Everyone in this film is impotent rage. They're all angry and they have no way of expressing it. So they kick down to whatever they have power over. And ultimately our hero, Billy, has nothing to kick down to. Even the other school kids pick on him. And and that is a running theme. Like when the older brother comes in drunk, he starts slapping him around the face and calling him names. And it's so meaningless. Like he just wants to get it out, but the guy's not, he's not receiving it. Yeah, well, the headmaster, before he canes them, he's giving this lecture about, you never change, you never do this, you never do this. And it's like, even in his own words, he's saying like, this is pointless. I just come here every day, I hit you, and then you walk off and you don't care. And they're laughing in his face. Like there's no respect at all. And it's like, that is the other running theme of this. Just everybody everyone's just so impotent and but angry about it, and they can't express it, so they get drunk.
I did write down everyone in England should be given therapy for free.
Yeah. Well, we are.
Oh, God damn it, you're right. Oh. Fuck. Never mind.
I don't think therapy even existed in 1969. Not in Barnsley, anyway.
Well, that's
that
the
was
thing.
clear. That was very clear.
Well, the therapy is go to the working man's club, drink until you pass out,
Yeah.
go back to work.
Do you know the phrase kitchen sink drama, or is that distinctly British? I feel like that's a British
Well,
thing.
again, we are not experts
We're here with our ignorance.
of film.
There was a wave of these in like the 60s, Alan, is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There was a wave of what they call kitchen sink drama, and it was films like Kes,
Taste of Honey.
Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, and Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. They were all about these like bleak working class people who lived for the weekend and didn't really have any prospects in their life, and it became very popular for a while and then kind of died off, but they still make them in various forms.
Do they spend a lot of time at the kitchen sink? Is that why they call it that?
I don't know actually where that specific name comes
look it
from.
up.
I wonder if it's might be a specific film where it all sort of takes place at the kitchen sink, and that was one of the four bears of it. I'm not sure, to be honest, but it's just one of those accepted terms like cinematic concealism that everyone uses. So, it's a genre which is a little bit, but it's social realism basically.
Ah.
It's kind of telling a true stories, particularly working class. Basically, in your working class family, you would have your front room, but that was for best. That was for like when the vicar came round or stuff like that. So you don't use that. You put the body there when it's laid out for a funeral. It's like that's what it's for. So everyone lived in the kitchen. The whole life took place in the kitchen. You had a little table there. The mum just potted around, cooking, cleaning, whatever. And so it's probably related to that somehow, in that everything happens in the kitchen. Yeah.
I've just looked it up and I can tell you it comes from the term kitchen sink realism, which was a term used for art in more broader terms. Kitchen sink realism artists were people who started just painting mundane things such as beer bottles or kitchen sinks, and presumably kitchen sink drama just developed from that.
Fair enough.
So there we go.
One thing we haven't really talked about is the kestrel. It feels like we should at least mention that, because the whole point, obviously, he decides to he finds this young kestrel. He decides to take it and tame it, so to speak, train it. But this is a beautiful thing, like he goes and gets a book and reads it, even though he can barely read, and he wants to learn, and that is like the kind of little flash of hope, this little kind of this element of life that he can control and understand, and then obviously it's taken away from him. That's the brutal ending. He just get kicked in the head at the end.
If the whole film had been kestrel centric, I think I'd really love it. If it had started with him, within the first 10 minutes thinking, oh, I'll go out and catch myself a kestrel, and spent time with him doing that, and there'd been more of a hint that perhaps he could do something with that, because that's the other thing. As it exists in the film, it's this hobby. It's quite an unusual hobby, but it shows that this kid is capable of teaching himself quite a specific craft and discipline, and capable of more, I suppose. But at the same time, there's not a lot of employment prospects for someone who learns to catch a kestrel. And
well, that's it. That's what you kind of...
Even if the teacher had developed that in him, he's probably still going to go down the mine.
Yeah, at the end, you're expecting the teacher to come round and go, look, I've arranged this thing. You can become an apprentice to a local kestrel keeper. Like that's the best you're going to get as a happy ending, isn't it? But you don't even get that.
No, I do think it's a very effective symbol throughout the film of, the potential and then it being taken away for a better life in any way.
Well, I mean, literally, it's a bird that's tied down. It's pretty.
But I think for me, the whole film was so stressed on behalf of the bird that I, even in the moments of comedy, as you have said, I was like, when is the bird going to get snapped? I just know it's gonna happen.
I'm assuming animals were harmed in the production of this film as well, Alan. Do you
Well,
do you know anything on that front?
I do know that obviously they needed a dead kestrel at the end, but the kid, David Bradley, who played the boy, he'd spent a lot of time with. They actually had 2 kestrels, stunt kestrels, and he'd helped train them. He had to learn how to do all the thing and all that. So he'd spent a lot of time with them, and then we're like, look, we're gonna have to kill one of these birds for the end, like so. Soz
Are
about
you
that.
serious?
So then, obviously, when he opens the bin and there's dead kestrel in there, it's a very genuine reaction. He'd spent a lot of time with them. They basically said, like, look, sorry, we've had to kill one of your birds. Like,
Holy...
But actually, they hadn't. But they told him that to get a kind of more genuine reaction out of him. And then But then the thing I was reading, they said they actually.
But they killed another one.
Well, that's what I was thinking. They said they actually found one that died of natural causes, and I was like, did they though? Did they? Yeah.
I think we probably should talk about the fact that I think the principal's character name was Grice Pudding.
Well, his name is Mr. Grice. So did someone call him Grice Pudding? That might be a sort of a teasing nickname. I mean, do you know what rice pudding is, or is that just a totally alien thing?
Connection was not made.
We've kind of reached the end of discussion of Kess, I think. It's been illuminating, I'm sure. We like to rate things out of 10 here. If you want to bring that to mind, and bear in mind, I've got my finger over the leave Zoom meeting button. I'm gonna march out in disgust.
I think there's a lot of really nice stuff going on in Kes, but I don't think it comes together as well as it perhaps could, and I think it's very dull for much of its running time in a way that isn't necessary. It's perfectly possible to make this kind of bleak kitchen sink drama, but very entertaining. We've talked about many cases, I think, on this podcast before where it's been done. And the ending just doesn't do it for me because it is so abrupt. There's no real sense of conclusion. Even I'm all for a bleak, depressing ending, but in terms of structure, it just kind of stops and you're like, oh, right, okay. So it's a bit of a mixed bag for me. I do respect a lot of what it's doing, but I don't love it. I give it a 6 out of 10. For
my own rating scale, it would have to be a 0 out of 5. On your guys' scale, I'd probably give it a 2.
For the sake of international relations.
Yeah. I do like respect what it was doing. I appreciate movies like this, and there were moments that made me sit and think about things that I appreciated thinking about, but they were not worth all the pain that I felt for the rest of it. It made me feel so bad for everybody in the film. It was educational, but I could only make my worst enemy watch this film.
I would say also, I'm so sorry, but it's a 2 out of 10 for me. And before this podcast started, it was at a strong 0. You talked it up.
You've talked it up quite a lot.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm learning about the history, learning about this. Our guy Ken. With this movie, I'm just glad that I already was having like a not great day.
Obviously, I like the film, but I think more than that, there is definitely for me a like I say, a sort of familiarity, seeing not really my own life, but my heritage kind of on screen in a way that you just don't normally, and also. I do. This, for me, this is what films should be. Like, this is the point. You're not telling a story as much as showing a piece of life. Also, you're making a social commentary point with that, basically. Or in this case, you're kind of revealing it to people. You go, look, you have no idea how these people live. You makes you really sad, doesn't it? Yeah, well, why don't you do something to help them? So let's change the system if it's that bad. This is the sort of thing I would want to make. Although I don't think I would be capable of it, frankly. Because I think I would try and be more entertaining. I think I would try and give it a slightly more upbeat ending. I don't think I've got the courage to just kick everyone in the head. And I wish I did. Actually, I improved my rating on Kess from this watch. I obviously preferred it to the last time I watched it. See,
I had it as a 7 when I saw it, and I didn't dare talk against it. I've actually bumped my rating down to a 6.
Okay, I had it as an 8. I've bumped it up to a 9.
Wow.
I'd love to make it a 10, but there are some sort of structural oddities in the film. But it's yeah, I would happily watch this film again.
Okay,
support you in
0.5.
that.
0.5.
If you were going to do an American version of Kess, like how would you approach it? Like what sort of cultural
Well, it's not
icons
Kestrel.
would you go
Bald
in,
eagle.
would you
Yeah.
try and attach it to? So I guess ultimately it's like, how do you tell in America this story of working class struggle and like what would you do?
Right. I mean, obviously, you have to take race into consideration in the States because so much of the class difference is also
Yeah.
tied to race in America. So that would most likely be a person of color. Honestly, these days, I would think a woman of color more so than a man, or even, a transgender person would be like the really downtrodden portion of society.
That's interesting because one sort of criticism of Ken Loach's career in general is that he always champions the underdog straight white man, which is there is a truth to that if you look at his body of work. But also he's a straight white man who was born in the 1930s. It's a certain kind of his time. So you can't expect an 85-year-old man to quite move with the times in the same way as everyone else does.
He definitely, I think he's definitely made a bit of effort to have some women in there, but then they're straight white women,
One of his very early films, in fact, pre-Kess, was about a woman who was having to get an illegal abortion. And so it was sort of about women's things and the stuff about homelessness and stuff. So he has touched on that, but like not much since.
Sienna, for your American version, would it be animated?
100%. I have a couple thoughts, which is, I mean, I could see this being more of like an Appalachian type of family. If it was like the angry disenfranchisement of the straight white man type, that's probably where they would put it.
Yeah, or like the Deep South, maybe like rural.
Right. I 100% could see this as Pixar, mostly based on the description that I read afterward, which completely misleads the viewer, which is that it's a little boy who likes comics, who lives in like a mining town, finds a kestrel and learns to train it, which sounds just whimsical. Make it a Pixar movie. The kestrel would talk, and then of course it would have a happy ending. And also all the villains, all the teachers and everything who yelled at him, they would also be redeemed at the end, and you would leave the theater feeling great.
Yeah.
Learning nothing more about the struggle of the people in your own country.
Truly. I also think we as Americans, when we read the description of it and we hear a mining town, that doesn't have the same historical significance laid over it as it does in the UK. True, yeah. And the same, like, I mean, obviously there have been fights for miners' rights and like more improvement of working conditions here, but not in the same massive way that it has happened in the UK. And so
it defined a decade of the UK, I'd say, the miners' strikes. That's kind of what I think of when I think of how is Margaret Thatcher perceived in America, out of interest?
From what I know from Billy Elliot and season 4 of The Crown, we hate her.
Yeah, she's bad.
I've definitely seen it a few times where American people have kind of been like, Margaret Thatcher's one of the greatest prime ministers of all time, is in a kind of, because she was the first female prime minister, I think there's a degree of like, yes, she's competent, brilliant, but she was evil. A fair description.
Yeah.
But she was very good at her job, to be fair, She just didn't do nice things.
Yeah. Competently evil.
Anyway.
May I give you a sort of task, a sort of homework, so to speak? I think Sol will approve of this.
As if watching Kes wasn't enough.
Oh my god, watch it again.
No, as a kind of a palate cleanser for that, watch This Is England.
Okay.
Because it's basically like the 2001 version of Kes. When was it? Was later than that? 2010?
2006, 2007, something like that, yeah.
But it is very much like this director has gone, I want to make the kind of modern day Kes. Although it's set in the 80s, so it's not even the modern day Kes. But anyway, the point is, it's got the kind of similar tone and feel of Kes, but it's a soul
it's
like
a modern film.
It's
got rock songs in it that you'll have heard on the radio.
Plus, it's much more accessible. It's much less bleak. It has the happy moments to offset the bleak moments. So, as a sort of continuation of a cultural exchange.
Okay, yeah.
And the thick British accents are really charming and endearing.
Sienna, what can we give the boys in exchange? You know what? Hey, have you seen Booksmart?
Yes.
Okay, fuck.
Alan, you haven't, have you?
No.
Alan, it's good though.
If I have to watch This Is England, you have to watch Booksmart.
Okay, wait. Also, have you seen 1917?
Yes.
We've both seen that.
Oh, okay, good.
Very good.
I loved it. Alan, you thought it was very good, didn't you?
Yeah.
Great.
I think you weren't quite as positive.
I thought it wasn't as good as everyone says it was.
And that's fair. It was made for me specifically, so I don't fault anyone for disliking it. This is my minor in college was the history of medicine and its advancements during wartime, specifically the First World War. And my type is George Mackay. Tick tick. That was all I needed.
But yeah, I get that. I like him. Have you seen Sunshine on Leith? Isn't that?
No, because it's not available in America.
Oh,
I've tried.
That's an extremely Scottish film, yeah.
But I have to have an Amazon.co.uk mailing address to pay for it.
Sol, that Sunshine on Leith is the Proclaimers jukebox musical
Oh,
in film form,
right, okay.
directed by Dexter Fletcher, I think, who went on to do Bohemian Rhapsody and the other one, Rocketman. Yeah,
the one I liked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for listening. Endpoint. Thanks for coming on, guys, and giving us your time.
Thanks for having us. It was really fun.